The air in his late wife's parents' house was always thick with the scent of lemon polish and unspoken grief. Kieran stood by the window, a paper plate of food he hadn't touched growing cold in his hand. It was the third anniversary of Lena's passing, a day that felt less like a memorial and more like a performance of sorrow he was expected to stage. He watched his daughter Amara, her beaded braids clicking softly as she showed her grandmother a drawing of a lopsided butterfly. She was the only real thing in the room. From the kitchen, the murmur of voices grew sharper. It was Chloe, Lena's younger sister. Her voice was a familiar instrument of sweet-toned condescension. He didn't mean to listen, but the sound of his own name caught him like a fishhook. "He's a good man, of course," Chloe was saying to a cousin. "Solid, dependable. But you know Lena. She was all fire and dreams. After that first fiancé broke her heart, she just wanted stability. Someone who wouldn't leave." A pause. The clink of ice in a glass. "Lena loved him. I know she did," Chloe continued, her voice dropping into a confidential, pitying whisper that scraped Kieran raw. "But he was her project, her safe place. She told me once, late at night, that he was the kind of man who would build a house brick by brick, but he'd never think to look at the stars. He was her anchor, she said, not her wings." The paper plate buckled in Kieran's grip. An anchor, a project, a safe place. The words weren't just insults. They were confirmations of a deep, quiet dread he had carried for years. He had known in some corner of his heart that Lena's love for him had been a different shape than his for her. His was a cathedral. Hers, a cottage built to shelter her from a storm. He had worked 3 jobs, not just to provide, but to be worthy, to build a life so secure she would never feel the winds of her past again. He thought he was building a kingdom for his queen. But he was just the foundation. Necessary, buried, and unseen. The world outside the polished window blurred. He felt a small, warm hand slide into his. Amara looked up, her dark eyes wide and perceptive. "Daddy, your face is sad." He forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Just thinking, sweet pea." He looked at his daughter, the perfect, beautiful fusion of him and a woman who might have only seen him as a means to an end. And in that moment, standing in a house that was never his home, a quiet understanding settled over him. His life had been about survival for so long, about being the anchor, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be the ship. He was about to be turned upside down. The first alarm screamed at 4:15 a.m., a brutal summons from the shallow depths of his sleep. For a moment, Kieran lay still, the ghost of Chloe's words clinging to him in the pre-dawn dark. An anchor. He swung his legs out of bed, his feet hitting the cool linoleum floor of his small apartment. The day didn't care about his feelings. The day demanded work. Job number 1 was the warehouse. He was a logistics supervisor, a title that sounded grander than the reality of managing inventory, placating overworked drivers, and the constant, bone-deep weariness that came from being on his feet for 10 hours. He moved through the cavernous space, the smell of cardboard and diesel fumes his constant companion. He was good at his job, efficient, respected, quiet. He solved problems with a calm that unnerved his superiors and earned the trust of the men on the floor. He was solid, dependable. The words echoed in the cavernous space. By 5 o'clock, he was punching out, but his day was far from over. He'd race across the city of Philadelphia in his beat-up sedan, the back filled with the tools of his second trade. Job number 2 was freelance handyman work. Leaky faucets, flickering lights, shelves that needed hanging. He moved through other people's homes like a ghost, fixing the small things that were broken, his dark, calloused hands gentle and sure. He liked the quiet solitude of it, the simple satisfaction of making something right. It paid for Amara's ballet lessons and the good crayons she liked, the ones with the sharp tips. Most weeknights, he was home by 8, just in time to cook a simple dinner, braid Amara's beautiful coils for the next day, and read her a story until her breathing deepened into sleep. Those were the hours that fueled him, the quiet, domestic rhythm that gave the relentless work its meaning. He would sit in the dim light of her butterfly-shaped nightlight, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling, and the exhaustion would recede, replaced by a fierce, protective love that was the truest thing in his life. But on weekends, there was job number 3, delivering groceries for a gig app. Long hours spent in his car, navigating city traffic, carrying bags up flights of stairs. It was the job he hated most, the one that felt most anonymous, but it was the one that was slowly, painstakingly, building a savings account, an escape hatch, a future for Amara that was wider than the 4 walls of their apartment in their historically black neighborhood. His life was a carefully constructed machine of labor and love. He took pride in his ability to provide, to protect, to be the unshakable center of his daughter's world. But since hearing Chloe's words, a hairline crack had appeared in the structure. He looked in the mirror and saw not a devoted father, but a fool. A man who had poured everything he was into a vessel that was never meant to hold him. He had been so focused on being Lena's anchor, he hadn't realized he was drowning. He smoothed down his pressed but worn work shirt. He took care with his appearance. His short, natural hair was always neatly trimmed, his boots always clean. It was a small act of dignity in a life that often felt stripped of it. He was more than his labor. He was more than a function. He just needed someone to see it. Miles away, in a tower of glass and steel that pierced the Philadelphia skyline, Naima Vance saw everything and felt nothing. From her corner office on the 40th floor, the city was a silent, glittering map. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, a title she had earned with a ferocious intelligence and a work ethic that bordered on self-punishment. Her deep brown skin was luminous even in the harsh fluorescent light of the boardroom, and her natural hair was styled in elegant, intricate locks that were a quiet statement of her identity in a world of corporate conformity. She commanded rooms with a stillness that was more powerful than any man's shout. Her sentences were precise, her logic unassailable. She was a force. A success story. A black woman who had shattered every ceiling placed above her, and she was profoundly, achingly alone. Her days were a blur of meetings, data analysis, and strategic decisions that affected thousands of lives. She moved through them with a curated grace, her tailored suits a form of armor. People didn't see her, they saw her position. They saw profit margins, power, and opportunity. They wanted her time, her approval, her resources. No one ever asked how she was. Her evenings were the starkest reflection of her life. She would return to a sprawling penthouse apartment that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was a monument to success, filled with minimalist art and designer furniture, but it held no warmth. It was a space, not a home. Dinner was often a perfectly balanced but tasteless meal delivery box, eaten while scrolling through more work emails on her laptop. The silence in the apartment was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city far below. Her backstory wound was not one of tragedy, but of 1,000 tiny cuts. Her parents, both respected academics, had loved her achievements, not her spirit. Affection was transactional. Praise was conditional. She had been engaged once to a charismatic entrepreneur who, she later discovered, had been more in love with the idea of a merger between their 2 dynasties than with the woman herself. He spoke of their future as if it were a quarterly earnings report. When she broke it off, he hadn't seemed heartbroken, merely inconvenienced. She had built walls so high and so thick that no one could hurt her. But she had also locked herself inside. She had every trapping of a successful life, but none of its substance. She had forgotten the feeling of a genuine, uncalculated laugh. She couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with simple affection, a hand on her arm that wasn't meant to guide her toward a photo opportunity. She looked out at the glittering city, a kingdom she had conquered, and felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She yearned for something real, something authentic, but she no longer knew where to find it, or if she would even recognize it if she did. The storm broke over the city with a sudden, violent fury. It was the kind of rain that seemed to want to wash the world away. Naima was driving, her mind still churning from a hostile board meeting where her latest acquisition was being picked apart by vultures in suits. She had taken a wrong turn somewhere in the maze of unfamiliar streets, trying to find a shortcut home, trying to outrun the tension coiling in her shoulders. Then came the sickening thud and the violent shudder of the car pulling hard to the right. A blown tire. She wrestled the luxury sedan to the curb, the engine dying as she brought it to a stop in a dimly lit, narrow street. Rain hammered against the windshield, blurring the world into a watercolor of bleeding neon and deep shadow. She tried her phone. 1% battery. It died in her hand. A wave of cold anxiety washed over her, something she hadn't felt in years. She was Naima Vance. She did not get stranded. She did not lose control. Yet here she was, trapped in a metal box, wearing a $4,000 suit, utterly helpless. Headlights swept across her car, and a battered sedan pulled up behind her. A man got out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark skin slick with rain. He wore work boots and a simple jacket, and he carried a heavy-looking tool bag. For a terrifying second, her carefully curated world of security guards and private drivers evaporated, leaving only the primal fear of a woman alone in the dark. He approached her window slowly, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't peer in, just stood with his hands visible. He had a kind face, she noticed, lined with a weariness that seemed etched into his very bones. He raised his voice to be heard over the deluge. "You okay in there? Looks like you've got a flat." His voice was calm, grounded, not threatening. She rolled the window down a crack, the scent of rain and wet asphalt filling the car. "Yes, my tire. It's blown." "I can see that," he said, a hint of a gentle smile in his tone. He gestured with his head. "The spare on this model is tricky if you don't know the mechanism, and this is no weather to be learning. My place is just there, at the end of the block. You can wait inside in the warm and call a car service. The streets are probably starting to flood anyway." Her mind, trained to assess risk and calculate outcomes, screamed at her not to trust him, to stay in the locked car. But something in his eyes, a quiet, straightforward decency, cut through the noise. He wasn't looking at her expensive car or her tailored clothes. He was looking at a person stuck in the rain. She made a decision based on something other than logic. She made it based on instinct. "Okay," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. He just nodded. "I'm Kieran, by the way." He waited for her to get out, holding his large jacket over her head to shield her from the worst of the downpour as they made a quick dash for the door of a modest brick apartment building. The gesture was so simple, so unexpectedly chivalrous, it left her momentarily speechless. He unlocked the door and led her into a small, warm, and blessedly dry hallway. And from that moment, the carefully constructed world of Naima Vance began to crumble. The apartment was small, but it was alive. The air smelled of cinnamon and something savory simmering on the stove. The walls were covered in a chaotic, joyful gallery of a child's artwork. Vibrant scribbles of suns with smiling faces, stick figures, and dozens of butterflies. It was the absolute antithesis of her own sterile penthouse. It was a home. "Sorry about the mess," Kieran said, though it wasn't messy, just lived in. "My daughter's a budding artist." He took her soaked jacket and hung it on a hook by the door. "Please, have a seat. I'll get you a towel." Naima stood awkwardly in the center of the living room, feeling like a creature from another planet. Her silk blouse was damp, her expensive leather shoes were ruined. A small girl with her hair in beautiful coils and bright, curious eyes peeked out from a doorway. This had to be Amara. "Daddy, who's the wet lady?" the girl asked, her voice clear and unfiltered. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name," Kieran said, returning with a fluffy towel. "Naima," she managed to say. "This is Naima," he told his daughter. "Her car had some trouble. She's going to wait with us for a little while." Amara stepped forward, her gaze unnervingly direct. She tilted her head. "Why are your eyes sad?" Naima was floored. No adult had ever asked her that. They asked about market projections and growth strategies. A 6-year-old girl had seen straight through the armor to the lonely woman inside. "I'm just tired," Naima deflected. But the girl's perception had already found its mark. Kieran handed Naima a steaming mug. "Ginger tea," he said. My late wife, used to say it could solve almost anything." The mention of his wife was quiet, a soft note of sorrow in his calm voice. Naima took the mug, the warmth seeping into her frozen hands. She sat on the edge of the slightly worn sofa, and as the simple, unconditional kindness of the moment washed over her, a dry towel, a warm drink, shelter from a storm, offered by a stranger who wanted nothing in return, something inside her broke. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Then another. She turned her head away, mortified, but Kieran had already seen. He didn't say a word. He just placed a box of tissues on the coffee table beside her and went to check on the dinner, giving her the dignity of a moment to compose herself. The next morning, Naima sent a courier to his address with a check for an amount that would have been life-changing for him. It was her way of restoring the transactional balance of her world. Kindness for money, a problem solved. By the afternoon, the same courier returned to her office with the check, torn neatly in half, accompanied by a note written in a steady, clean hand on a piece of notebook paper. "I'm glad you got home safe. You don't owe me anything." Naima stared at the 2 pieces of the check. It was the most profound rejection she had ever experienced. He didn't want her money. He didn't want her influence. He had simply been kind. The realization shook her to her core. She had to see him again. She manufactured a reason, a brilliant and plausible one. Her company was opening a new distribution center on the outskirts of the city. They needed a short-term logistics consultant with on-the-ground experience. His resume, which she had her assistant discreetly pull, showed a decade of exactly that. She called him herself, her voice all business, and offered him the contract. The pay was exorbitant, the hours flexible. He was hesitant, suspicious of the sudden good fortune. "Why me?" he asked, his voice direct. "Because your experience is a perfect fit for the project," she lied smoothly. "And because I believe in repaying decency with opportunity." He accepted. And just like that, she had a reason to be in his world. Their meeting started in her sterile boardroom. Kieran, in his best pressed shirt, was quiet, intelligent, and deeply competent. He offered insights that her Ivy League-educated team had missed entirely. He saw the human element in the complex machine of supply chain. But it was the meetings she engineered outside of the office that slowly began to change everything. She would stop by his apartment with urgent documents that could have been an email, always around dinner time. The first time, she stood awkwardly at the door until Amara grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. "Are you staying for dinner? Daddy's making spaghetti." She stayed. The spaghetti was simple and perfect. Afterwards, Amara insisted on showing Naima her most prized possession, a scrapbook filled with pictures and drawings of butterflies. "This is a monarch," she explained, her small finger tracing the outline. "They fly thousands of miles. Daddy says they're stronger than they look." Naima felt a pang of recognition. Another weekend, she arrived on a Saturday morning with a box of donuts as a pretense. Kieran was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes. A cloud of smoke was beginning to form. "Daddy, you burned it again," Amara announced with a giggle. Kieran sighed, scraping a blackened disc into the trash. "Pancakes are my mortal enemy." Naima found herself laughing, a real, unbridled sound that felt foreign and wonderful. "Let me try," she said, rolling up the sleeves of her cashmere sweater. She'd learned to cook from a YouTube video one lonely Sunday, a skill she'd never had occasion to use. Her pancakes weren't perfect. One was shaped like a strange continent, but they weren't burnt. They sat at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them, eating slightly misshapen pancakes with syrup, and for the first time in over a decade, Naima felt a flicker of simple, uncomplicated joy. She was not a CEO. She was not a powerhouse. She was just Naima, a woman eating breakfast with a kind man and his delightful daughter. Each small domestic act was a gentle chisel, chipping away at the marble walls she had built around her heart. The evenings grew longer, the conversations deeper. One night, after Amara was asleep, they sat on his small balcony, the city lights twinkling below. He told her about Lena, about his grief, and finally, about the words he had overheard. "I spent all these years thinking I was building a fortress for her," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "only to find out I was just one of the bricks." Naima felt his pain as if it were her own. It resonated with the deep loneliness she carried. She, in turn, told him about her parents, about her ex-fiancé, about the crushing weight of being valued only for her utility. "He once told me I was his greatest asset," she said with a bitter smile. "Not his greatest love, his asset." They sat in the shared silence of their wounds, two people from vastly different worlds who had been made to feel invisible in the exact same way. In his small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with love and struggle, Naima felt more seen than she ever had in her palace of glass and steel. He saw past the CEO to the woman beneath, and she saw past the tired worker to the quiet king who ruled this small, warm kingdom. The bond between them was no longer about a debt of kindness. It was becoming something more fragile, more terrifying, and infinitely more precious. The world Naima inhabited did not tolerate anomalies. A multi-billionaire CEO spending her evenings in a working-class neighborhood in West Philadelphia was an anomaly it could not process. Marcus Thorne, a slick and ambitious board member who had long coveted her position, was the first to weaponize it. He was a man who saw connection only as leverage and kindness as a fatal weakness. He hired a private investigator. The grainy photos that surfaced on a notorious financial gossip blog were damning in their ambiguity. Naima, laughing on a sun-drenched Saturday, a smudge of flour on her cheek, standing on the porch of a modest apartment building. Naima, carrying a bag of groceries into the same building late one evening. Naima, sitting on a park bench, her head tilted toward a tall, handsome black man, as a little girl with braids played at their feet. The headline was Poison. Naima Vance's dangerous double life. Is the tech titan spiraling? The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, painting Kiran as a gold-digging opportunist and Naima as an unstable leader whose judgment was compromised. It hinted at a sordid affair, a reckless dalliance that put the company and its shareholders at risk. It was a story designed to strip her of her power by attacking her character, using the city's deep-seated class and social divides as its fuel. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The company's stock dipped. The board called an emergency meeting. The air in the 40-floor conference room was frigid. Marcus presented the blog post as if it were a federal indictment, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Naima, we are all worried about you," he began, his voice oozing insincere sympathy. "Your behavior has become erratic. This association is a serious liability. It demonstrates a profound lack of judgment. We need to discuss invoking the conduct unbecoming an officer clause in your contract." The other board members, a collection of gray-faced men and a few women who had long been her allies, looked at her with a mixture of fear and disappointment. They saw the scandal, the stock price, the threat to their own comfortable positions. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the burnt pancakes or the butterfly drawings. They didn't see the first real human connection she had made in 20 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kieran. "I saw the news. I'm so sorry they're doing this to you. Don't worry about me. I'm okay." His first thought was for her. Even now, as his name was being dragged through the mud, his concern was for her safety. The contrast between his quiet dignity and the predatory circle of sharks around the polished mahogany table was staggering. In that moment, the fear that had been gripping her heart vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She had been playing their game for her entire life, chasing a definition of success that was hollow at its core. No more. She would not let them turn the one beautiful, real thing in her life into something ugly and transactional. She would not let them win. Naima stood, her posture radiating a calm authority that silenced the room. She looked at each board member, her gaze lingering on Marcus, whose smirk faltered under her direct scrutiny. "Thank you for your concern, Marcus," she began, her voice even and clear, devoid of the emotion they expected. "You are right. My behavior has changed. For years, I have lived and breathed for this company. I have sacrificed my personal life, my health, and my own humanity to drive shareholder value. I have delivered record profits. I have made you all very, very wealthy. And in return, I have been afforded a life of profound isolation." She paused, letting the words settle. "A few weeks ago, my car broke down in a storm. My phone was dead. I was a woman, alone and vulnerable. And a man, a complete stranger, offered me shelter without a second thought. He didn't know who I was. He saw a person in need, and he helped." She looked directly at the faces around the table. "That man is Kieran Thomas. He works 3 jobs to provide for his daughter. He is a man of more integrity, decency, and quiet strength than anyone in this room. He has reminded me what actual value is. It is not measured in stock prices or market caps. It is measured in kindness, in compassion, in the courage to care for another human being without asking, 'What's in it for me?'" Her voice grew stronger, imbued with a passion they had never heard from her. "You see the pictures in that disgusting blog post, and you see a liability, a scandal. I see the first moments of genuine happiness I have felt in my adult life. I see a man who saw me, not my title. I see a little girl who taught me that a butterfly is a symbol of change, and that burnt pancakes can be the most delicious meal in the world." She walked to the head of the table and placed her hands flat upon its gleaming surface. "For years I have allowed this company, and all of you, to define my worth. I have chased a version of success that nearly cost me my soul. I will not let you take this from me. If my association with a good, honorable man and his child is conduct unbecoming of your CEO, then it is clear I am no longer fit for the position." With a steady hand, she slid her security badge and a signed letter of resignation across the table toward the chairman. "Because I am choosing a life of value over a life of valuation. My resignation is effective immediately." A stunned, absolute silence descended upon the room. Marcus looked utterly poleaxed. He had expected a defense, a denial, a plea. He had never anticipated an abdication. Before anyone could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. It belonged to Eleanor Vance, an older black woman who had been on the board for decades and had been Naima's silent mentor. "This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever witnessed," Eleanor said, her voice rich with authority. "Naima Vance has given this company her entire life. She has just demonstrated more leadership and integrity in that speech than Marcus Thorne has in his entire career. We are not accepting this resignation. We are, however, opening an immediate inquiry into Mr. Thorne's attempts to deliberately sabotage a fellow officer of this corporation." The tide had turned. The sharks, smelling new blood in the water, turned on Marcus. Naima simply picked up her purse and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, not caring about the outcome. She had already won the only battle that mattered. She was free. She didn't go home. She drove, the windows down, the city air feeling fresh and new on her skin. She drove straight to the one place that now felt like a true north. She found Kieran on the small front porch of his building, fixing the wobbly leg of a small bicycle. He looked up as she approached, his face etched with worry. He had seen the news alerts. He had been bracing for the fallout, fearing for her. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Naima, are you okay?" She didn't answer with words. She walked up the 3 short steps and simply folded herself into his arms. He held her, his embrace strong and sure. It wasn't a hug of passion, but of refuge, of homecoming. She breathed in the scent of sawdust and his simple, clean soap. "I'm more than okay," she whispered into his shoulder. "I'm finally me." They stood like that for a long time, the sounds of the neighborhood, Distant music, children laughing, the rattle of the elevated train, forming a symphony around them. They didn't need to speak of the boardroom, of Marcus, of the victory or the resignation. He understood. He had seen her caged, and now he was seeing her free. A small voice broke the spell. "Naima, you came back!" Amara stood in the doorway, her eyes shining. In her hand, she clutched a folded piece of drawing paper. She ran to Naima, her arms wrapping around her legs. "I made you something," Amara said, her voice muffled against Naima's leg. She held up the drawing. It was wrinkled and creased, clearly the product of intense concentration and love. Naima knelt down, her knees pressing into the worn wood of the porch, so she was eye level with the little girl. She took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. She unfolded it carefully. On the page were 3 stick figures drawn in bold crayon. On the left, a tall figure in blue with short, curly black hair. In the middle, a small figure in a bright yellow dress, her hair in 2 puffy buns with beads on the ends. And on the right, a figure in a green dress, her hair drawn as long, elegant lines. All 3 figures had been colored in with the same rich brown crayon. Their stick figure hands were linked. Above them, a magnificent butterfly with wings of every color in the box soared against a bright blue sky. "That's my daddy," Amara said, pointing a small, determined finger at the tall figure. "He's the tallest 'cause he can reach the top shelf. That's me. I like yellow." Her finger moved to the last figure. "And that's you. I think you would look pretty in green." Naima's vision blurred with tears. Her heart, which she had guarded for so long, felt like it was expanding in her chest, pushing out all the old pain and loneliness. Amara's finger gently traced the connected hands of the 3 figures. "See?" she whispered, as if sharing the most important secret in the world. "It's our family now." A sob escaped Naima's lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated catharsis. She pulled Amara into a fierce, gentle hug, burying her face in the child's soft hair. Over Amara's shoulder, her tear-filled eyes met Kieran's. He was smiling, a real, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face, chasing away the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. In his gaze, she saw not gratitude or surprise, but a deep, profound recognition. He was being seen. She was being seen. They were being seen, together, through the clear, honest eyes of a child. 6 months later, the golden light of late afternoon spilled over a vibrant community garden. The air was sweet with the scent of turned earth and blooming lavender. Naima, dressed in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt, her elegant locks tied back in a messy bun, pressed soil around the base of a young tomato plant. Her hands, once accustomed to the cold gleam of a smartphone, were now smudged with dirt. She hadn't gone back to the company. After the board summarily fired Marcus and begged her to stay, she had politely declined. Instead, she had used a significant portion of her wealth to establish a foundation, one that provided grants and mentorship to small, community-focused businesses in neighborhoods just like this one. She wasn't an empress in a tower anymore. She was a partner on the ground. Kieran was there, leaning against a raised garden bed, laughing at something Amara had just said. He looked like a different man. The profound weariness had lifted from his shoulders. He now worked one job, as the director of logistics for Naima's foundation, a role he was perfectly suited for. He had time now. Time to coach Amara's soccer team. Time to simply sit on his porch and watch the sunset. Time to breathe. Amara, a whirlwind of energy in a yellow sundress, darted between them, chasing a cabbage-white butterfly that fluttered just out of her reach. Her laughter was the garden's brightest bloom. The narrator's voice, warm and reflective, seemed to settle over the scene. It spoke of how family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you build. It is a garden you choose to tend, a home you construct not with bricks and mortar, but with small daily acts of love and recognition. Amara finally gave up her chase and ran to Naima, her small hands holding a treasure. It was a bracelet, woven from tough blades of grass, with a single resilient dandelion tucked into the braid. She held it out solemnly. "This is for you," she said. Naima smiled, allowing the little girl to fasten the fragile bracelet around her wrist. It was more precious to her than any diamond tennis bracelet she owned. Amara looked up, her expression serious, her dark eyes holding a question she had clearly been saving for the right moment. Naima, she asked, her voice quiet but clear, are you staying forever? The simple, devastating question hung in the warm air. It was the question beneath all their other questions, the hope they had all been silently nurturing. Naima looked from Amara's earnest, hopeful face to Kieran. He had pushed himself off the garden bed and was watching her, his heart in his eyes. He didn't speak, but his gaze asked the very same thing. Tears welled in Naima's eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked at the man who had shown her the meaning of strength and the child who had shown her the meaning of love. She looked at this life they were building, a life of purpose and warmth and slightly misshapen pancakes. Yes, she said, her voice thick but certain. She cupped Amara's face in her hands. Yes, sweet girl, I am. Kieran closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't kiss her, he simply laid his hand over hers, the one with the dandelion bracelet. His calloused, strong fingers intertwined with her own, a silent promise, a quiet affirmation. They were an anchor for each other, and they were each other's wings. True wealth is not found in the balance of a bank account, but in the feeling of being truly seen. Love is not something you find when you are perfect. It is something that finds you in your beautiful, imperfect humanity. It is a choice, made every day, to show up, to care, and to build a home in the heart of another. One crayon drawing, one shared silence, one simple, world-changing yes at a time.